Department of Education once and for all.
There was a tense vibe hanging over Washington that morning. The sky was a solid gray, and the wind whipped the flags outside the White House with force. But inside, it felt like a bright, sunny day. The moment Donald Trump stepped up to the podium, the energy in the room shifted. Standing ovation, flashing cameras, smiles from the governors in the front row. This wasn't just another press conference. Today, he was about to announce a decision that would end a 45-year-long debate once and for all. Today, we're taking a historic step, Trump said, wearing his usual confident grin. We're starting the process to shut down the Department of Education completely. The room fell silent for a beat, then erupted in applause. Trump raised his hand and continued, "We've waited a long time for this. Republicans wanted it, and even some Democrats secretly agreed. Today, we're putting this broken agency in the history books." While the cameras zoomed in on him, a young woman standing tall by his side caught people's attention. One voice in the press crowd whispered, "That's Caroline Leavitt, right?" Yep, that was her. White House press secretary, young, sharp, commanding, and rising fast. It wasn't a coincidence she was standing next to Trump. She was there to manage not just the message, but the political firestorm that would follow. Her eyes were steady, her face calm. She had a reason to be there that day. Meanwhile, something else was unfolding across town. At CNN headquarters, a group of strategists watched Trump's announcement live, their faces tight with concern. "If this goes through," one of them said, "every single federal education dollar gets pushed to the states. This isn't just a policy move. This is a power shift." Within hours, social media was on fire. Hashtags were trending fast. Save education, hash Trump cuts, hash leave it strikes again. Just as many people cheered as they raged. And behind the scenes, it was obvious. There were already people working to sabotage the whole thing. But to Caroline Leavitt, this wasn't just about a bill. It was a test. In the middle of a political storm, she was standing tall beside the man she had pledged to serve. And that day, she had to show once again the quiet but undeniable strength that made her a force in Washington. Because here in DC, some battles aren't won with a mic. They're won with a single look. As Trump spoke from the podium, an unusual silence filled the room. He was used to speaking over applause and loud cheers, but today was different. What he said wasn't just exciting his supporters, it was quieting his critics too. The Department of Education was a mistake made 45 years ago, he said, leaning slightly into the mic. And today, we're finally fixing it. A few claps echoed through the room, but most people stayed quiet. Everyone was still processing what this actually meant. Shutting down the Department of Education completely? That wasn't just some bureaucratic tweak. It was a direct hit to the foundation of the system. Cameras slowly panned across the crowd. Ken Paxton's eyes locked onto the lens, focused and unshaken. Beside him, Linda McMahon gave a confident nod. She would be known as Trump's final Secretary of Education. At least, that was the plan. But Trump wasn't alone on that stage. Big Republican names like Greg Abbott, Ron DeSantis, Kim Reynolds, and J.D. Vance stood behind him, solid as a wall. They were there to back this bold move, and the cameras were broadcasting it to the whole nation. Trump kept going. "Give us back the right to raise our own children. That job doesn't start in Washington, it starts at home." That line reignited the room. Applause broke out. Some even stood. But not everyone looked reassured. Because this wasn't just a policy move, it was a declaration of war. Reporters in the room scribbled notes at lightning speed. Tweets were flying. On social media, Trump's education bombshell was already trending. Trump glanced briefly at his notes, then spoke clearly. "This agency has pumped ideological poison into our children for years. What we need isn't obedient followers, we need thinking American citizens." Then, out of nowhere, a small protest noise rose from the back rows. Some low murmurs. Trump's security team shifted focus in that direction. But Trump didn't even pause. Because this was exactly the kind of moment he thrived on. Right then, a staffer handed him a note. Trump glanced at it, his smile returning. He leaned into the mic again. "Looks like the Democrats just heard the news. The Biden administration just released a statement calling our decision shocking and a threat to democracy. You want my response? The room went still. Trump chuckled softly and dropped the line. Democracy isn't what they think it is. Democracy is the voice of the people, and I'm listening. The applause that followed wasn't just support, it was a rallying cry. Outside, protesters were gathering. Inside, history was being made. When Trump stepped down from the podium, the room was still echoing with applause. But this time, there was something uneasy hidden in that sound. Everyone knew this wasn't just another press conference, this was the end of an era. And now, everyone was waiting for the ripple effects to start. Linda McMahon came right up to him and whispered something in his ear. Trump gave a slight nod, then went silent for a moment, away from the cameras. He turned to his circle of advisors and said with quiet determination, "Now the real fight begins." At the same time, headlines started blowing up on CNN, MSNBC, and all the major news networks. Trump announces plan to eliminate Department of Education. Democrats furious. And the White House's first statement? This is a dangerous attack on our constitutional order. But this wasn't just a political chess move. Governors from red states like Texas, Florida, and Ohio were already flooding social media with support. J.D. Vance tweeted, "Shrinking the federal bureaucracy means growing freedom. Trump is doing the right thing." Meanwhile, Caroline Leavitt held a press conference that morning, answering reporters' questions with clarity and confidence. President Trump's decision gives families their voice back in education. The parents, teachers, and students who've been ignored for too long are finally going to be heard. But the real firestorm hit when the Washington Post leaked an internal memo. Several high-ranking Department of Education officials were considering resignation, calling the decision unconstitutional. Things spiraled fast. Democrat lawmakers called for emergency sessions in Congress. Protests broke out in New York and San Francisco. Teachers' unions floated the idea of strikes. On college campuses, students marched with signs that read, "Education is a right." The Biden administration said they were exploring every legal option to counter the move. Over on Fox News, one political analyst put it bluntly, Trump isn't just dismantling an agency, he's tearing down an entire ideology. And he's not doing it alone. People like Caroline Leavitt are leading the charge. Inside the White House, the atmosphere was different. Caroline Leavitt stood by the window in her office, looking out. A thick folder in her hand, her desk covered in documents. Her phone kept buzzing, notifications nonstop. Every press release, every word, every look from here on out would matter. One of her aides walked in. "Leavitt, a columnist from The Atlantic, called you the new face of the American right. They want an interview." Caroline didn't answer. She just nodded, closed the file, and stayed quiet. Because for her, this moment wasn't just a political win. It was a personal responsibility. Taking education out of D.C. and giving it back to the states, building a system shaped by the voices of real people. She was ready to be the voice of that movement. Not through a microphone, but with strategy and precision. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump sat in his office watching coverage of his speech on CNN. One of his advisors approached with concern. "Mr. President, this move could carry you all the way to 2028. But you've just opened a massive front. Are you sure?" Trump stayed quiet for a beat, eyes still on the screen. Then, without turning his head, he replied, "Rebuilding America won't be easy, but someone's got to do it." And right then, bold letters scrolled across the bottom of the screen. The beginning of the end for the Department of Education. Outside, the storm was just getting started. Protests were growing, senators were clashing, social media had become a battleground. But inside, the man who lit the match was calm. And right beside him stood a woman. Ice in her gaze, steel in her step. Caroline Leavitt. The war had begun. And this time, the people would choose the winner.